Well, good morning and welcome to English 7B, Block 5, B5, and we're going to talk today about some literary elements. As you probably know, you don't have a Project 2, but it's good to get the literary elements, and we're going to talk about inferences as well. So let's start with the literary elements. This is something I think is we need to have this as a background for any story writing, any story reading, and also for drama. It's all the same. I've said many times to many students throughout time that there is no story without a conflict. If two people are just sitting in Barcalounger watching television, that is not a story. But if for some reason there's some kind of conflict, like one knocks a Diet Dr. Pepper out of the other's hand, then we have a conflict. We need to know why, and we need to know that something is going to ensue. So let's talk about our literary elements. Number one, the setting. The setting is often considered to be the bottom of a pyramid because we have to know where we are. Now, sometimes we will see alternative settings for certain types of traditional plays, but this is basically where are we and what is the situation? What are we physically experiencing? Are we in space? Is it 1800? Is it before? Is it caveman era? Is it in the future? So what is our setting? Time and place. And again, the time may be past, present, or future. And again, it may be real or imaginary, or a combination of the two. Like I had said about conflict, this video will not come up and play for us, but conflict is the inciting incident, is the moment that something happens in a story that creates its interestingness. It's the struggle between two opposing forces. Usually they're called protagonists and antagonists. And then we can talk about man versus nature, man versus man, man versus self, man versus the supernatural. So we can talk about those as well. The plot is how the story goes along. The plot line or the story arc is how a story happens. And it's going to look a little bit like this. So a series of events in a story that centers around a conflict. It is a story. It's the story plot. And this is what it looks like. So, Miguel, I have a question for you. Why do you think the rising action is longer or taller than the falling action? Because if you think about a story or a movie, as the tension builds versus when the tension's been released. Yep, yeah, you said that very well. It takes a lot longer to sort of build from the conflict. It takes a lot longer to tell the story and create and build all that tension. Then once the tension's released right at the climax, there's not a whole lot of places to go. So the rising action, so you're going to see down here in this corner, and this is something I think about a lot. Right here where this bend happens from the exposition, which is basically telling you everything, it's an introduction of the story. Right here at this bend is how I like to consider how a roller coaster takes off, where this is where the inciting conflict happens. Right here, it's where the roller coaster takes off. So I think that helps a lot. So we'll talk about the exposition. It establishes the setting and introduces the characters. Miguel, I'd like to ask you another question. Can you tell me, are all characters human beings? Yeah, it could be a fable. In fact, sometimes when there's really powerful forces, such as a book that is very famous and is very hard to read, is called Moby Dick. There's a character that's a whale, and there's a man, and then there's characters sometimes that we think of like in disaster movies. Sometimes the actual disaster is a character. It's interesting. So the exposition also gives lots of important background information, so when we know who we're dealing with. And so then we have the inciting incident that brings us up to the conclusion, and then we go to the rising action. Then we go to the climax where all of the tension is released, and then we go down through the rising action where the everything is resolved and the story is done. Let's talk about character. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly here. Excellent. That is a very good point. The people, animals, or imaginary creatures in which take part in the action of the story. Theme. Theme is a very big theme in your course, your Unit 2 this week. Talking a lot about theme. Excuse me. It's the meaning or the moral of the story. One thing that I think is a very helpful trick for students to know, for everyone to know, is that theme is sometimes the title of a story. To Kill a Mockingbird could be the theme of a story. So the meaning or the moral of the story is the theme. So themes basically express ideas about life or human nature. Sometimes themes are stated directly, but more often than not they really are implied and need to be figured out. And that being said, you would then infer that information. So I'm going to take you a little bit through plot setting and mood. This is a little more detailed, but it has what you're it's plot setting and mood are very consistent. Some teachers, whether they're maybe more theater-based or they're more high school-based or college-based or old school or new school or whatnot, they might have some different ideas, but basically it's the same. So we want to talk about why a story really affects us the way that it does. What is an author's tone intending to do? What mood does it give the reader? So the plot is a series of scenes that traces a conflict or struggle between opposing forces. Now that conflict cannot go unresolved. I am so sorry. The conflict cannot go unresolved. You can't just have a constant tension and then for it to end without any resolution, because that isn't the way that we're wired. That isn't the way that we expect it to be. So this is a very, very nice plot analysis where it basically has the 6 elements that I had discussed. There's a few others in here, but we have the exposition, which is what does the information does the writer give you at the beginning of the story? What do you already know, or what has the writer made you think you know? So if you're doing a mystery or some kind of twist. So in the rising action comes after the inciting incident. What event in the rising action drew you most as a reader? And that's usually the inciting incident. Conflict is the opposing forces. So what conflicts are present? There can be more than one. And how do you identify them? Climax is often considered the most exciting or suspenseful part of the story, and it's the part of the story that switches, that where everything rides upon and everything gets switched. Now, falling action, you can kind of feel it, that everything's kind of coming to an end, that the tension has burst. In what way is the action part of the story different from the first part? So often a lot more low key. And finally, resolution. How does this part of the story make you feel? Are you satisfied? Are you unsatisfied? Did the writer leave you hanging? Did the writer leave you hanging in a way that you think is delicious? So let's talk a little bit about our three pigs. Oops. So you can see this is okay, but it depends on what you think about the story. So we've got where the pigs are, the events, and you can read these as you're going through. And I'm just going to pop out of here. Oops. Alrighty, so this is one of my very favorite stories of all time. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to talk to you about inferences. So my goal for you to do in this particular session today is to know a lot more about setting and different elements of plot and something about inferences. Again, we do not have a project this week, so let's just talk about inferences. It will be a very short and sweet one student session. So let's talk about inferences. So when we talk about the author and the things that the author has provided in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, or versus the things that the author hasn't provided, or our themes are very, very crystal clear, they're in the title, they're in a story, we can identify them, we know exactly what it's going on. It's not always true. In most cases, and I would say in the most entertaining, satisfying cases, the author wants you to infer the theme of the story. So we're going to use some strategies to make those predictions. So today, this is our expectation for this portion of our lesson. We're going to read a book without knowing the title or investigating any background knowledge. We're not reading a whole book, though. We will read through the book once, and if you have any ideas, feelings, connections, or questions regarding the context, please take a note. So, my name is Rose Blanche. I live in a small town in Germany with narrow streets, old fountains, tall houses with pigeons on the roof. One day, the first truck arrived and many men left. They were dressed as soldiers. Winter was beginning. Okay, I'm there. I know what the setting is. I know we have a woman, a girl or woman. We know she's in a small town in Germany. We know that a large truck has taken away men dressed as soldiers and winter is coming. So we are doing that. As there are just you and I, that's what we talked about already. But I don't think we know the time period yet. I think we can assume based on what we've known, and we can infer that based on what we've read and seen. Now the trucks follow each other under the school windows. They are full of soldiers. We don't know, but they wink at us. They drive tanks that make sparks on the cobblestones. They are so noisy and smell like diesel oil. They hurt my ears, and I have to hold my nose when they pass by. Sometimes it seems things haven't really changed. But my mother wants me to be careful crossing the street between all the trucks. She says soldiers won't slow down. Lots of times I walk by the river, just looking at it. Branches float along, and sometimes old broken toys. I like the color of the river. It looks like the sky. What do you think the tanks are doing in a small town, sir? Miguel, what do you think they're doing in this small town in Germany? So think about what we know about Germany, and think about what we know about soldiers in Germany. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's excellent. Getting ready for a war. And I'm going to infer that perhaps if it's Germany, perhaps it's getting ready for a war during the 30s and 40s, which would be World War II. Let's see. The trucks are fun to watch. We stand in the doorway as they pass. We don't know where they're going, but we think they're going someplace on the other side of the river. One day, one of the soldiers, one of them stopped so the soldiers could repair the engine. A little boy in the back of the truck tried to run away. Are you getting a sense of this? But the mayor was standing there in the middle of the street. He grabbed the little boy by the collar and brought him back to the truck. Then he smiled at the soldiers without speaking, and they thanked him. The sky was gray. The soldiers climbed back into the truck. Doors banged shut, and it pulled away very fast. Yes, please type. Please tell me what you're thinking. Miguel, please tell me. Why did the little boy try to escape? Why didn't anyone do anything to help him? Who, what group of people do you think the little boy was a part of? Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I think perhaps the little boy was of one of the many ethnicities that Hitler was against, such as perhaps a young Jewish boy. I wanted to know where the little boy went, so I watched the truck until it disappeared around the corner. The street was crowded. Kids were playing. There were bicycles and farmers' tractors all over. It was noisy, just like every day when school is out. But I walked down the sidewalk ignoring everyone. No one saw me. I walked for a long time, past the edge of town into the open fields where I had never been. The clouds were gray. There's that repetition again. The clouds were gray. I followed the tracks to the forest and found a clearing. There's that gray again. We see that. Suddenly, barbed wire stopped me. Behind it, there were several children standing still. Are you kind of sensing, Miguel, where this is going? I didn't know any of them. The youngest said they were very, very hungry. Since I had a piece of bread, I carefully handed it to them through the pointed wires. They all stood in front of the long wooden houses. The sun was setting behind the hills. It was windy. I was cold. Lots of gray, lots of cold, lots of wind. Weeks passed by in the pale winter. Rose Blanche's appetite surprised her mother. She took more to school than she ate at home, all the bread and butter she could carry, even more jam and apples from the cellar. Rose Blanche was getting thinner. In town, the mayor was staying fat. You are a very, very insightful person. Everyone watched everyone else. Rose Blanche hid her food in her school bag and sneaked out of school early. What did Rose find? Can we name it? Can we speak to it? Can we name what we think was She found? What did they call those places where they kept the boy in the striped pajamas? Do you know the name of them? Can I help? So the boy in the striped pajamas was interred, or like was imprisoned. He was imprisoned in a concentration camp. That's what they were called, to be imprisoned at that time because of. So it was primarily Jewish people, as you have learned and know, but it was many others who were not in line with the Hitler government. So she didn't tell her mother, maybe because her mother would stop, maybe because she didn't want her mother to get in trouble, right? There's a lot of different reasons. And why did she want to help these people? I think we have a sense that she was a good person. And maybe during the war, maybe her mother would have wanted to feed the children, but they didn't have enough for themselves. By now she knew the road by heart. There were more children by the wooden houses, and they were also getting thinner behind the barbed wire fence. Some of them had a star pinned on their shirts. It was bright yellow. Miguel, do you know what that means? A bright yellow star that was pinned on their shirts? Do you? It's okay if you don't. I'm just wondering. That is 100% correct. Excellent work. Thank you so much. When the snow melted and the streets were very muddy, the trucks full of weary soldiers drove only at night. This time in the other direction. Ah, the other direction, and they were weary. Okay. They were coming with no lights on from the far side of the river, and they never stopped. One morning, all the people of the town fled, carrying pots and burlap bags and chairs. There were soldiers among them. Some had torn uniforms, some were limping, some were in pain and asking for water. Rose Blanche disappeared that day. She walked into the forest again. I am going to ask you, Miguel, why were they limping? Why were the trucks going the other way? Why were they running away? Why were their uniforms torn? Why were they in pain? I'm going to have you type and I'm going to keep reading. Fog had erased the road. Rose Blanche was hopping around the mud puddles to keep her shoes clean. In the middle of the woods, the clearing had changed. It was empty. Rose Blanche dropped her school bag full of food. She stood still. Shadows were moving between the trees. It was hard to see them. Soldiers saw the enemy everywhere. There was a shot. At that moment in town, some other soldiers arrived. Their trucks and their tanks were also noisy, and they also smelled like diesel oil. But get this. Yes, that is also true. But it was the same soldiers she had seen, and the same soldiers were driving the opposite way. They were coming back. Those same soldiers had torn uniforms and were hungry and were in pain and were limping. So now this new piece is directly connected to that piece. Their trucks and their tanks were noisy, but their uniforms were of a different color and they spoke a different language. What's happening, Miguel? Our first soldiers are, there's no one in the camps anymore. Our first soldiers are being driven away, and we have strange new uniforms in a language that she doesn't speak. Yes, it has started, or I'd like to recommend from what I've inferred about this story is that all of the soldiers and the happy soldiers and the boy that was dragged back and the fat mayor and all of that was the beginning of war. the happiness and beginning of war. Now, the soldiers who are tired and beaten down and torn, and the camp is empty, now the war is ending. Another clue to the war is ending is new people that she's never seen before, colors of uniforms and languages. Because during World War II, when the Germans were defeated, the Americans and the Russians came, primarily the Americans, came in. So Rose Blanche would be a German speaker, and now the Americans have come in to to help. So Rose Blanche's mother waited a long time for her little girl. The crocuses finally sprang up from the ground. The river swelled and overflowed its banks. Trees were green and full of birds. Spring sang. Gonna ask you this now. Everything was gray and snow and cold and gray and icky sky. What have we got going on here? And what does it mean? What does spring mean? The happy ending. But we do know it for me what the theme is that life goes on. Unfortunately, I can infer, due to the fact that Rose's mother waited a very, very long time until all of the flowers grew again, and that shot that was in the forest, that Rose did lose her life. Yes, Rose lost her life, but the war was over. So we know that. So I conclude that this was World War II, and that this young woman um, and the soldiers who were everywhere did lose. Yes, exactly. So there is beauty in it, and this is kind of what people refer to, I think. This is how I refer to the words bittersweet, where we know that probably millions of people were saved, and the bad soldiers were put out of commission, but a little girl did lose her life. But spring did come again. So that is our inference lesson for today. That was a good inference lesson. So because it is you and me, I'm not going to worry too much about our academic vocabulary. This is in your lessons 10 through 15. If you have any questions about 10 through 15, please let me know. If you need a retake on your exam 1 or a retake on your exam 2, please let me know. This is not for my current student, but the others. Make sure that you turn in your project 1. For my current student, I will grade that this week, and I appreciate your patience as I was out ill last week, and thank you very much. And if unless you have any questions, student, I am going to sign off, so you and I can both go get our lunch. Yes, you will. Okay, then I will see you later. Have a wonderful day.